Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to examine a story that's been developing quietly in the shadows of global geopolitics. While much of the world's attention has been focused on the conflict in Ukraine, another potentially explosive situation has been taking shape in the Indo-Pacific region. This involves a significant arms agreement between Russia and China that intelligence analysts believe could fundamentally alter the strategic balance around Taiwan. In late 2023, researchers at the Royal United Services Institute, a prominent British defense and security think tank, obtained access to leaked documents that revealed something extraordinary. These papers detailed an agreement between Moscow and Beijing for a comprehensive military equipment package, specifically designed to enhance China's capabilities for airborne assault operations. The timing of this deal, occurring during Russia's ongoing conflict in Ukraine, raises important questions about the strategic calculations being made by both nations. According to the documents analyzed by the Institute, Russia committed to selling China a substantial quantity of specialized military hardware. The package includes 37 BMD-4M light amphibious assault vehicles, 11 Sprut SDM-1 light amphibious anti-tank self-propelled guns, and 11 BTR-MDM Rakushka airborne armored personnel carriers. What makes this transaction particularly noteworthy isn't just the hardware itself, but the comprehensive nature of the agreement. Russia has also committed to training an entire Chinese airborne battalion in the operation of this equipment and, perhaps most significantly, to transferring the underlying technology so that China can eventually manufacture these systems domestically. The equipment will be extensively customized to integrate with Chinese military systems. This includes fitting the vehicles with Chinese communication suites, command and control systems, and modifications to allow them to fire Chinese-manufactured ammunition. This level of integration goes far beyond a typical international arms sale. It represents a deep interweaving of Russian and Chinese military-industrial capabilities, something that defense analysts view as a substantial step toward the much-discussed partnership between Moscow and Beijing. To understand why this particular equipment package is so concerning to defense planners in Taiwan and allied nations, we need to look at Taiwan's unique geographic characteristics. The island is dominated by a central mountain range that covers approximately 60% of its total land area. This mountainous spine effectively divides the island, creating significant challenges for any potential invasion force trying to advance overland. Defense analysts have long recognized that Taiwan's terrain naturally channels any invasion attempt toward coastal areas and the relatively flat western plains. Taiwan's own defense research institutions have identified approximately 20 beaches on the northern and western coasts that would be suitable for large-scale amphibious operations. Recognizing these vulnerabilities, Taiwan has spent decades fortifying these potential landing sites. The island conducted its largest military exercise since 1984 in 2025, mobilizing 22,000 reservists for a 10-day training period. These drills focused on defending against amphibious assaults at known vulnerable points, practicing air raid procedures with the civilian population, and testing command and control systems under combat conditions. Taiwan has also maintained a close defense relationship with the United States, receiving advanced weapons systems and tactical training. Over 4 decades of preparation, Taiwan has systematically reinforced the most likely invasion routes with fortifications, pre-positioned ammunition, and carefully planned defensive positions. This is where Russia's contribution to China's military capabilities becomes strategically significant. The Russian equipment package includes specialized systems that could allow Chinese forces to bypass Taiwan's coastal defenses entirely. Central to this capability is a parachute system known as dalnolyot, which translates to far flyer in English. This advanced system enables paratroopers to exit aircraft at extremely high altitudes, up to 32,000 feet, and glide considerable distances to their landing zones. Intelligence assessments suggest the dalnolyot system has an operational range exceeding 50 miles, which would allow aircraft to remain well outside Taiwan's air defense envelope, while still delivering troops and equipment onto the island. The strategic concept outlined in the intelligence documents describes a multi-layered approach. In this scenario, Chinese Special Forces personnel could infiltrate Taiwan through various means. Some might use the high-altitude parachute systems, jumping from what appear to be civilian cargo aircraft and gliding undetected into the island's interior. Others might enter Taiwan legally as tourists or business travelers in the days or weeks before military operations commence, positioning themselves near key objectives before any conflict begins. Following this initial infiltration, heavier equipment would be delivered using the same high-altitude parachute systems. Unlike traditional airborne operations that require aircraft to fly low and slow over drop zones, making them vulnerable to air defenses, this approach would allow transport planes to maintain high altitudes and significant standoff distances. Within hours, China could theoretically establish a heavily armed battalion on Taiwan soil without a single naval vessel crossing the Taiwan Strait, which has been the traditional focus of Taiwan's defensive planning. The primary objective in this scenario would likely be Taipei's port facilities and major airports. Seizing these, installations would provide Chinese forces with secure entry points for follow-on forces, transforming what might otherwise be a contested amphibious assault into a more straightforward reinforcement operation. By attacking from within Taiwan's defensive perimeter, Chinese forces could potentially avoid the most heavily fortified coastal positions that Taiwan has spent decades preparing. Now let's examine the specific capabilities that each of these weapon systems brings to China's potential operational planning. The BMD-4M infantry fighting vehicle represents Russia's most advanced airborne assault platform currently in service. This vehicle combines firepower, mobility, and amphibious capability in a package designed specifically for rapid deployment by parachute. The vehicle is armed with a 100mm main gun and a 30mm automatic cannon, giving it the ability to engage both armored vehicles and infantry positions effectively. What makes the BMD-4M particularly valuable for airborne operations is its ability to be airdropped with its crew remaining inside the vehicle. This means that within minutes of landing, you have a fully operational fighting vehicle ready for combat, rather than needing to gather crew members and conduct time-consuming equipment checks. The vehicle can also swim across rivers and coastal waters at approximately 6 miles per hour, allowing it to navigate Taiwan's numerous waterways and coastal areas that would impede conventional armor. The BMD-4M has seen combat use in Ukraine since 2022, providing real-world data on its capabilities and limitations. In Ukrainian operations, these vehicles have been employed in combined arms operations, providing mobile fire support for advancing infantry and serving as rapid response assets. The vehicle's relatively lightweight compared to main battle tanks gives it superior acceleration and mobility, allowing it to quickly move between positions and exploit gaps in enemy defenses. However, combat experience in Ukraine has also revealed significant vulnerabilities. The vehicle's light armor, necessary for its airdroppable design and amphibious capability, makes it susceptible to modern anti-tank weapons. Open-source intelligence tracking by organizations monitoring equipment losses in Ukraine suggests that at least 170 of these vehicles have been destroyed or captured during the conflict. Many of these losses have come from relatively inexpensive anti-tank guided missiles and even commercial drones modified to drop munitions. The Sprut SDM-1 represents a different capability set. This is essentially a tank destroyer mounted on an air-droppable chassis. Its main weapon is a 125mm gun, the same caliber used on Russia's T-90 main battle tanks. This gives the Sprut the ability to engage and destroy heavy armor at considerable ranges, something that would be crucial in countering Taiwan's fleet of M1A2 Abrams tanks and indigenous Brave Tiger tanks. The SDM-1 variant includes advanced fire control systems and programmable ammunition that can be set to detonate at specific points along its trajectory. While this capability might seem unnecessary for engaging tanks, it becomes highly effective against infantry in defensive positions. A projectile can be programmed to detonate above a trench or behind a defensive wall, showering the area with shrapnel and neutralizing defenders without requiring a direct hit. The Sprut has seen limited use in Ukraine, primarily because the conflict there hasn't featured the kind of deep penetration airborne operations that the vehicle was designed for. Russian forces have been unable to achieve the air superiority necessary to conduct large-scale airborne assaults, so these specialized vehicles have remained relatively rare on the battlefield. For Taiwan, however, the vehicle's combination of heavy firepower and air deployability could be used to establish anti-armor positions deep inside the island's defensive perimeter, threatening Taiwan's armored reserves before they can reach defensive positions. Production of the Sprut has been limited, with Russia maintaining only small numbers due to competing demands from its broader military vehicle programs. The Ukraine conflict has placed enormous strain on Russian military production, with facilities prioritizing more conventional armor and infantry vehicles. Some components of the Sprut are shared with the T-90 tank program, creating additional production bottlenecks. The BTR-MDM Rakushka armored personnel carrier completes the package. This vehicle is designed to transport 13 fully equipped soldiers plus a 2-person crew, and like the other systems in this package, it can be airdropped with its passengers aboard. The vehicle provides protection from small arms fire and shell fragments while maintaining the mobility necessary for rapid operations. In the Ukraine conflict, similar armored personnel carriers have been used for rapid assault missions, delivering small infantry teams to objectives quickly and providing covering fire during dismount operations. For a Taiwan scenario, defense analysts envision these vehicles being used to deliver special forces teams to critical infrastructure targets throughout the island. While Taiwan's military concentrates on defending coastal areas and monitoring the Taiwan Strait, these vehicles could be delivering assault teams to airports, communication facilities, power generation stations, and government buildings throughout the island's interior. The concept is similar to Russia's attempted seizure of Hostomel Airport outside Kyiv in the opening days of the Ukraine conflict. Russian airborne forces landed at the airport with the objective of securing it for follow-on forces, potentially allowing Russia to rapidly build up a significant military presence near the Ukrainian capital. That operation ultimately failed due to fierce Ukrainian resistance and Russia's inability to reinforce the position, but the underlying concept remains valid. The difference in a Taiwan scenario would be the scale, potentially involving dozens of drop zones simultaneously rather than a single objective. The final element in the reported arms package is the Orlan 10 reconnaissance drone. While less dramatic than armored vehicles, this system has proven to be one of Russia's most effective tools in Ukraine. The Orlan 10 is a relatively small and inexpensive unmanned aerial vehicle designed for reconnaissance, artillery spotting, and electronic warfare missions. Its modular design allows it to carry different payloads depending on mission requirements, including daylight cameras, thermal imaging systems, or electronic warfare equipment for jamming enemy communications and disrupting opposing drone operations. In Ukrainian combat operations, Orlan 10s have provided Russian forces with persistent surveillance, allowing commanders to track enemy movements, identify defensive positions, and coordinate artillery strikes with considerable precision. The drones can remain airborne for several hours, providing real-time intelligence that significantly enhances the effectiveness of ground operations. For Taiwan, the drone's capabilities present a serious challenge. Taiwan's relatively compact size, approximately 14,000 square miles, means that a network of these drones could potentially provide near-continuous surveillance coverage of the entire island. This would allow Chinese forces to track Taiwanese military movements, identify reserve formations before they reach defensive positions, and provide targeting data for missile and artillery strikes. The electronic warfare variants could jam Taiwanese military communications, disrupt command and control networks, and interfere with Taiwan's own drone operations. When you examine these systems together, a clear operational concept emerges. Rather than conducting a frontal assault against Taiwan's fortified coastal positions, Chinese forces could use high-altitude parachute insertions to establish armed formations throughout Taiwan's interior. These forces would target the island's relatively limited number of ports and airfields, potentially seizing them before Taiwan's reserves could fully mobilize. This approach could bypass decades of Taiwanese defensive preparations focused on repelling seaborne invasions. Of course, having sophisticated equipment is only valuable if your forces know how to use it effectively. This is why the training component of the Russia-China agreement may be even more significant than the hardware itself. China and Russia have dramatically increased the pace and scale of their joint military exercises over the past several years. Throughout 2024, Chinese military aircraft conducted more than 3,000 incursions into Taiwan's air. Defense Identification Zone. That averages out to more than 8 intrusions every single day, representing a sustained pressure campaign that keeps Taiwanese forces on constant alert, while simultaneously providing Chinese pilots with extensive experience operating in the airspace around Taiwan. These incursions serve multiple purposes beyond simple intimidation. They allow Chinese forces to test Taiwan's response procedures, measure reaction times, and identify patterns in defensive operations. Each incursion generates intelligence about radar coverage, fighter response protocols, and defensive postures. Over time, this builds a comprehensive picture of Taiwan's defensive capabilities and potential vulnerabilities. The joint exercises between China and Russia have also intensified. In July 2024, Chinese and Russian strategic bombers conducted joint patrols that brought them near Alaska, demonstrating both nations' ability to conduct coordinated long-range operations. In September of that year, Chinese and Russian naval vessels conducted joint patrols throughout the northern Pacific, with warships from both nations operating together for extended periods. Closer to Taiwan, China has conducted increasingly large and sophisticated military exercises. Following the inauguration of Taiwan's President William Lai, China launched what it called the Joint Sword 2024A exercise, involving 53 ships and more than 80 aircraft in operations around Taiwan. The timing, immediately following a political milestone in Taiwan, sent an unmistakable message about Beijing's willingness to respond to developments it views as threatening to its interests. In February 2025, China conducted one of its largest amphibious landing exercises, featuring dock landing ships, amphibious assault ships, and comprehensive supply vessels. The exercise demonstrated China's ability to land main battle tanks, amphibious vehicles, and infantry support systems on hostile beaches. While China characterized these as routine training, the scale and timing suggested more specific operational preparations. According to analysis from defense researchers, Russian military advisors have been present at multiple Chinese training facilities, specifically focusing on airborne operations and urban warfare. These are precisely the skill sets that would be required for the kind of operations that the leaked documents describe. Russia's extensive experience in urban combat, particularly from operations in Ukraine, where front lines have stabilized around major population centers, provides valuable lessons that Chinese forces would need for operations in Taiwan's cities. Beyond conventional military exercises, China has also intensified what security analysts call gray zone operations against Taiwan. These are activities that fall below the threshold of open warfare, but still serve strategic military purposes. Since 2023, 4 major undersea cables connecting Taiwan to the global internet have been mysteriously severed. While China has denied any involvement, the timing and locations of these incidents have led many analysts to conclude they represent deliberate actions designed to test Taiwan's vulnerability to isolation and gauge international responses. Chinese Coast Guard vessels now routinely operate inside Taiwan's territorial waters, conducting what Beijing describes as law enforcement operations. These incursions are typically coordinated with People's Liberation Army Navy ships positioned just outside territorial limits, creating a continuous military presence in waters surrounding Taiwan. This serves to normalize Chinese government presence in these areas, while simultaneously testing Taiwan's willingness and ability to respond. However, beneath this surface of military preparation, China faces significant economic vulnerabilities that could complicate any military action against Taiwan. The most critical of these involves China's maritime trade routes, particularly the Strait of Malacca between Malaysia and Indonesia. Nearly two-thirds of China's maritime trade flows through this single choke point, including approximately 80% of China's oil imports. In the event of military action against Taiwan, the United States and allied nations could implement a blockade of this strait, effectively severing China's access to global maritime trade. The economic consequences for China would be severe. Trade accounts for approximately 37% of China's gross domestic product, and a significant portion of that could disappear essentially overnight in a blockade scenario. China would be forced to rely primarily on overland trade routes, particularly pipelines and rail connections with Russia for critical energy supplies. However, Russia already supplies approximately 20% of China's oil imports, following several agreements signed after the Ukraine invasion began. Dramatically increasing this dependency would make China heavily reliant on a single supplier whose own economic and political stability remains uncertain. China's Belt and Road Initiative was designed in part to address this vulnerability by creating overland trade connections to Europe and the Middle East. However, many of these projects have faced significant challenges. The Gwadar port in Pakistan, intended to provide China with direct access to the Indian Ocean and bypass the Malacca Strait entirely, remains years behind schedule despite billions in investment and still lacks basic cargo handling facilities. This brings us to a crucial question about Russia's motivations in this arms deal. On the surface, the transaction appears straightforward enough. Russia gains much-needed revenue from arms sales, while its defense industry operates under severe strain from the Ukraine conflict. China receives combat-tested equipment and training from a military with recent and ongoing combat experience. Both nations strengthen their partnership in opposition to what they view as Western dominance in global affairs. However, some analysts see more desperate calculations underlying Russia's actions. According to assessments from defense researchers, Russia may actually be hoping that China initiates military action against Taiwan specifically because it would force the United States and allied nations to make difficult choices about resource allocation. A major conflict in the Pacific would almost certainly reduce the level of military assistance flowing to Ukraine, potentially giving Russian forces relief from the pressure they currently face. Russia's economy has been severely damaged by international sanctions. Its military has suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties in Ukraine. Weapons stockpiles have been depleted to the point where Russia has been requesting artillery ammunition from North Korea and drones from Iran. The Russian military, once considered the world's second most powerful, has been reduced to reactivating T-55 tanks designed in the 1950s and converting civilian vehicles into improvised military transports. Given these circumstances, Russia's willingness to sell advanced military equipment to China raises questions about whether Moscow can actually fulfill these commitments. The BMD-4M and BTR-MDM systems that Russia has agreed to sell are the exact types of vehicles that Russian airborne forces need for their own operations. Every vehicle sold to China represents one less vehicle available for Russian military use. Russia's defense industry, despite operating at maximum capacity, struggles to replace even basic equipment losses. Artillery barrels wear out faster than they can be manufactured. Precision-guided munitions remain in short supply. Tank and armored vehicle production lines run continuously, but still can't match battlefield losses. So the question becomes, How can Russia deliver 60 armored vehicles, comprehensive training programs, and technology transfers to China while its own forces desperately need these same capabilities? Several possibilities exist. Russia might be so desperate for Chinese financial support and political backing that it's willing to hollow out its own military capabilities. Alternatively, the deal might be more about demonstrating cooperation between Moscow and Beijing than actual hardware delivery. There's also the possibility that China might receive older variants or refurbished vehicles rather than new production models. Russia has a long history of selling export versions of weapons that lack some capabilities of domestic variants. This situation creates an interesting comparison. If Russia has been unable to defeat Ukraine despite significant advantages in population, industrial capacity, and initial military strength, what does this suggest about China's chances against Taiwan? Let's look at some relevant figures. Ukraine's defense budget in 2021, before the Russian invasion, was approximately $4.2 billion. Taiwan's defense budget for 2024 is $19.1 billion, more than 4 times larger. Ukraine had approximately 200,000 active military personnel before the invasion. Taiwan has 165,000 active personnel, plus 1.66 million trained reservists, who have completed military service and can be mobilized. Beyond the numbers, there are qualitative differences. Ukraine entered the conflict primarily equipped with Soviet-era weapons, with Western military assistance arriving gradually as the war progressed. Taiwan, by contrast, has been receiving advanced American military equipment for decades. The island's military operates F-16V fighter aircraft, AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, M1A2 Abrams tanks, and numerous indigenous weapon systems designed specifically to counter a Chinese invasion. Taiwan fields Patriot air defense systems, has been expanding its submarine fleet, and has invested heavily in anti-ship missiles specifically designed to destroy invasion fleets. Perhaps most importantly, Taiwan benefits from geography in ways that Ukraine does not. Ukraine is a large country with thousands of miles of borders that Russia could attack from multiple directions. Taiwan is an island. Every Chinese soldier, every vehicle, every ammunition crate must cross approximately 100 miles of open water to reach Taiwan. This strait represents an enormous kill zone that heavily favors defenders. Unlike the early days of the Ukraine conflict, when Russian forces achieved strategic surprise and nearly reached Kyiv in the war's opening hours, Taiwan would likely have days or even weeks of warning before any invasion. China cannot hide the assembly of the massive amphibious fleet necessary for an invasion. Satellite surveillance would detect a buildup immediately, giving Taiwan time to fully mobilize its reserves, disperse forces to reduce vulnerability to initial strikes, and prepare defensive positions. Russia's performance in Ukraine has also provided valuable intelligence about Russian military equipment and doctrine. The very vehicles that Russia is selling to China have proven vulnerable to modern anti-tank weapons. Ukrainian forces have destroyed hundreds of Russian armored vehicles using Javelin missiles, NLAW systems, and even older weapons like RPG-7s, equipped with modern warheads. Taiwan has been carefully studying these lessons and adapting its own defensive preparations accordingly. This raises another critical factor. China's military technology, while impressive on paper, remains largely untested in actual combat. China has been developing and showcasing advanced weapons systems for years, including J-20 stealth fighters, aircraft carriers like the Shandong and Fujian, hypersonic missiles, and other sophisticated systems. However, China hasn't fought a major war since 1979, when it launched a brief invasion of Vietnam that Chinese leadership characterized as teaching Vietnam a lesson. That conflict ended badly for China, with Chinese forces suffering heavy casualties against a much smaller Vietnamese military before withdrawing after less than a month. Every Chinese weapon system, every tactical doctrine, every command structure remains theoretical. The People's Liberation Army conducts extensive training and exercises. But training against your own forces is fundamentally different from fighting an actual enemy. Compare this to militaries like those of the United States and NATO allies, which have been in near-constant combat operations for decades, gaining experience in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and numerous smaller operations. These forces have also been learning from Ukraine's successes over the past 3 years, implementing modifications to procurement systems, adapting tactics for drone operations, and developing specific countermeasures for Russian equipment and doctrine. The fact that China is seeking Russian weapons and training suggests that Chinese military planners have doubts about their own capabilities. If China truly believed it could successfully invade Taiwan using indigenous equipment and doctrine, why would it need Russian systems and expertise? Chinese leadership clearly recognizes that their military is untested, their equipment unproven, and their strategies theoretical. This doesn't mean Taiwan is safe from Chinese aggression. China could still attempt an invasion out of desperation, miscalculation, or domestic political pressure. Russia might actively encourage Chinese confrontation as a means of relieving pressure on its own position. The gray zone operations will continue, and military exercises will likely intensify. The danger is that a single miscalculation or over-aggressive action could trigger a chain of events that neither side can fully control. The situation in the Taiwan Strait represents one of the most dangerous flashpoints in contemporary international relations. The leaked documents revealing Russia's arms sales and training assistance to China provide insight into how both nations are positioning themselves for potential conflict. However, the significant challenges that Russia has faced in Ukraine, combined with Taiwan's geographic advantages and decades of defensive preparation, suggest that any Chinese attempt to seize Taiwan by force would face enormous obstacles. The economic consequences for China, the military risks involved, and the likelihood of international intervention all serve as deterrents. Nevertheless, the continued military buildups, increasingly aggressive exercises, and deepening Russia-China cooperation mean that this situation requires sustained attention from policymakers and defense planners worldwide.